Welcome to Grid Live Wrap Up. IndyCar at Detroit, the Chevrolet Grand Prix of Detroit was another Honda taking the win. We have Formula One at Spain. Oscar Piastri dominates, but Max Verstappen stealing the headlines. Plus IMSA at Detroit and Formula E getting down to the last 5 races championship coming towards the end shortly, and it has ended for several. I'm Joe Sanriego. With me, Kobe Lambert from Grid Tonight and Tanner Smith, editor at pitboxpress.com. A big thank you to our Patreon investors, Colin Deschelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew for investing in the Grid Network each and every month. Link in the video description to invest in us through Patreon. You can also do a one-time contribution through Buy Me a Coffee, YouTube Super Chat. We'll thank you on the air. Update the leaderboard. As you can see, Jason and Amber tied for the lead at 5 cups of coffee or Super Chats in total. And we encourage everyone to subscribe, hit the bell icon, follow us across social media, Grid Network TV and gridnetworktv.com. All our articles from NASCAR, F1 Academy, plus clips from our shows will be posted there. Now, Kobe, Tanner, IndyCar, let's start with that. We are 7 races into the 2025 IndyCar season, and only 2 drivers have won it this year. Alex Palou, 5 wins. And now you got to add Kyle Kirkwood with 2 wins after holding off, out of all the people, Santino Ferrucci, Colton Herta, Will Power to claim a win with a damaged wing right there at Detroit. His front wing, it reminded me of Alex Palou a couple years ago at Toronto when that front wing was just barely holding on such a bumpy street course. He managed to get second place behind Christian Lundgaard that year. Kyle Kirkwood, he said it didn't have much of an impact, and overall, he made the most of it, getting essentially points. He now takes second place in the point standings. So once again, while Palou has been leading the championship all year long, that battle for second place, if that was the driver's championship position, my goodness, what a season this would be. But Kobe and Reddy, they looked very fast this weekend, all weekend. And Kirkwood, I'm wondering if getting pushed by Will Power gave him a little extra motivation because he was just perfect in the race. Do you believe right now, if Alex Palou was the best driver on the grid, is Kyle Kirkwood that second best driver out in the field?
Well, a few years ago when Sergio Perez was in Formula One during his better days at Red Bull, we called him the king of the streets. If we had a king of the streets in the IndyCar Series, I think we'd be calling that the Kyle Kirkwood, because when you look at him on these street courses compared to high performance on the road courses and the ovals, he's definitely a superior street course racer, and she showed it today. Fastest car all weekend. I know he was frustrated yesterday after qualifying because he felt like he left some out there on the track. Thought he could potentially have had the pole, but that didn't really matter because he was able to carve his way to the front. And despite that front wing damage you mentioned, Joe, he was able to persevere, and get a well-deserved win. This Andretti Global team, looked really good this weekend, especially not just Kirkwood, but Colton Herta as well, actually getting a complete race under his belt and a podium finish. I know they've had some issues in the pits earlier this season, and also dating back to last season as well. That's cost Colton Herta, some really good finishes, and for him to be able to get a double podium there for Andretti, really good for him. And Dennis Hauger, in the Indy Next Series, looking strong for Andretti as well. And, Marcus Ericsson, who finished down the running order compared to his teammates. I know he has to be feeling a little nervous right now because Dennis Hauger in the Indy Next Series continues to perform as well as he's performing. Dennis Hauger might potentially put himself in line to take that 28 Honda next year alongside Kirkwood and Colton Herta. But to get back to the question, thought it was a flawless weekend for Andretti and Kyle Kirkwood, awesome win for him. And I think that, if Alex Palou has some more trouble later on in the season, maybe Kyle Kirkwood could be the driver who could challenge him later on in the year. Palou doesn't have many bad days out there. Today was one of them, not of his doing. We'll get into that a little bit later, but Kyle Kirkwood did a great job to capitalize on Palou's misfortune.
Yeah, I've got to agree with Kobe that Kirkwood did well to obviously rebound from that devastating penalty after his 6th place run at Indianapolis to score the victory today. He had a pretty commanding weekend outside of when Will Power commanded his car during practice on Friday. But other than that, he seemed like the fastest driver all weekend and certainly showed it today by making a lot of passes and going to the top step of the podium. I think that if you just look at the stats, I would probably lean towards saying Kirkwood is one of the top 3, top 5 best drivers right now in the series. But at the same time, we also haven't really been to a terrible amount of ovals to this point, and Kirkwood hasn't, obviously he hasn't won a race at one of those yet, so I can't really rate him as highly as someone like Power, McLaughlin, Newgarden, Pato O'Ward, etc. Not only that, I don't believe he's won at a designated race course at this point. I believe all 4 of his victories to this point have been on street circuits, which in itself is pretty impressive, but at the same time, it does lead to, it makes you wonder if, he's going to be able to parlay that into, winning at permanent courses and on ovals. I think that Kirkwood has a lot of speed and a lot of courage a lot of times, and knows how to make a lot of the right moves to get himself in position to win a lot of weeks. But again, at the same time, I can't really rate him as highly as Pato O'Ward, though I will say at the moment, if there's any threat to Alex Palou's title chances, it's probably coming from Kirkwood right now, considering he's the only one that's won thus far.
Only one that has won this so far. And one correction, Pato O'Ward is still second in the points. Kyle Kirkwood right now in third. That battle very close between Kirkwood, Pato O'Ward. We've seen Lundgaard even claim second in the championship standings. A lot going on in the chat room, Denver. Alex Palou is USA cruising at the moment. He was cruising, but fortunately we'll get to how his race ended. No fault of his own. Just we talked about it, Emily and I, the dangers of this new restart area, and it claimed Palou. But the most frightening incident I think everyone is talking about, the moment of the race where we saw Louis Foster, his right front suspension failed at the end of a very long straight. They said this is the longest straightaway in any road course. He was out of control, spinning after hitting the wall, collecting Felix Rosenqvist, who was about ready to make that corner. The two hard into the tire barriers. Thankfully, both drivers were okay, but we did know that Felix Rosenqvist got out of the car, waved to the fans, but was carried out on a stretcher. After race, talking to Bob Pockers, he said his knee banged the wheel, so it was pretty much sore, some pain there. So took him for a failure evaluation, but thankfully it's okay. Louis Foster, he was shocked and upset to see such a failure, attributing to the bumpy nature of the Detroit track. I know Felix Rosenqvist said this is probably one of the most bumpiest tracks out there. However, something interesting, Will Buxton pointed out after the race, all 3 Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan cars had some sort of tire issue. You look at Graham Rahal, looked like the tire was on the right rear, not exactly tight, comes in, super long pit stop. They needed a hammer, trying to get that off. You have Devlin DeFrancesco, I believe it was the right-left tire, rear left tire that came off onto the track, causing a caution flag. This area of the car has very limited rooms for modification. Mainly the dampers is what you're looking at for modification on the Indy cars here. And we know what happened with the Indy 500. Teams are looking for that edge. Same times, of course, parts just happen to fail. So Tanner, should IndyCar look into the Louis Foster incident to see what caused such a failure?
I believe so. I don't think it would be a waste of resources to take an extra hard look at what happened here, especially considering how rare it is for a front suspension to just fail completely out of the blue like that. I obviously don't have the statistic handy on me, but I think someone mentioned that the last time that they saw anything like this was when Hinch suffered a similar incident, and I believe they're referring to the Indianapolis wreck that nearly took his life. So, yeah, definitely agree that this should be something we should look into as far as IndyCar's management is concerned. I would like to think it was just a freak accident and nothing, really happened. But at the same time, it's something to look at. I mean, it could be something related to the circuit and just how punishing it is to the race car. Other than that, though, I can't really pinpoint, anything that would, basically, I can't think of anything that looks incriminating about what they did, or what happened. It just seemed like a really terrible freak accident, and thankfully, both drivers have been released from the infield care center and will likely be on the grid for the next race at Gateway.
Yeah, I don't really have too much more to add to that. I do think that IndyCar should look into this, and we already know IndyCar, takes great pride in the safety of these cars. The DW12 chassis, been an incredible car for safety, and they've continued to improve it over time. But yeah, it really seems that this is just a freak accident. None of Louis Foster's doing. So unfortunate incident here, and it was quite a rough day for the Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing Team. Louis Foster having a failure, and then Graham Rahal tire didn't want to come off, and then Devlin DeFrancesco, they didn't even get the wheel on properly for it to stay on the car. Yeah, so it was just a real rough day for that whole organization, and really happy to see Louis Foster and both Felix Rosenqvist walk away from this really scary incident. Felix Rosenqvist, although it was a different track last time, Detroit hasn't been too kind to him. Remember the old Belle Isle track we used to go to for this race? You remember the throttle stuck, and then he went head into the tire wall at full speed, and then they had to put him on the stretcher. Then it was a real difficult scene for Felix there, and then to have another scary incident right here, Detroit to be stretchered off. It was almost like deja vu over again. And when he was complaining about his leg pan, worried it was something serious, but to see him walk out the care center, talk to Bob there at the end, real positive sight to see. Hopefully his knee will heal by the time we get to Gateway on Father's Day weekend.
Yeah, we hope to see him at Father's Day weekend over at Gateway. Was such a scary moment. In the chat room, Denver asked a question: how come there's no chicane at that back straight on the Detroit street course? I mean, I could see if there was some sort of chicane in the middle. You don't have cars going over 180 plus entering a big braking zone. But at the same time, I feel like the chicane might take away a big key passing opportunity. I mean, really, Tanner, Kobe, I just don't see any other big passing opportunity in this track currently.
The track itself right now is way too tight and narrow for passing to really be possible anywhere else. So going down that very long straightaway is really your only chance, especially if you're on the push to pass and the hybrid. So yeah, I get the safety concern of it, but we also didn't really see any other incidents crop up outside of this one in that particular turn. Obviously we saw some contact down the straightaway into the braking zone into turn 3, but other than that, yeah, this just seems like a freak accident. I don't think that the length of the straightaway at this track into the hard braking zone was really the problem here. I just think that we had a freak mechanical failure that may have exposed some flaws in how the barriers are put up, that maybe we could reinforce a little bit better next year, so that way we don't have drivers banging their knee into their steering wheel. But outside of that, I just don't really see any use in adding even more treachery to an already treacherous track that sees very little passing.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Tanner. I don't really think there's a need for a chicane here. And, with the long back stretch, with the use of the hybrid and the push to pass system, this is a real good overtaking opportunity. And if we, add a chicane halfway down this long stretch, you can pass into the chicane and all of that, but, it would just take away the sensation of speeding, on these street courses. You have a long straight like that, that's supposed to be fun for the drivers. You get down on the power there, and then you get into that braking zone there at the end of the straight. And then Humperdinck, nice to see you again, Humperdinck. I haven't seen you in a while. And he said that was a car issue, not a track issue. Totally agree with you on that. And in regards to the Detroit street circuit being extremely tight, as we'll talk about, later on in the show, it provides an interesting and fun race for the sports cars being so tight, almost like a short track race. But for the Indy cars, it can be quite a big of a problem. Pato Award, I'm not sure if you guys saw his interview after the race, but he slammed this street circuit. He was saying that he wished we could go back to Belle Isle, because he said at Belle Isle you could really get to push the limits of the IndyCar and see what it could do. And he said that at this street circuit in downtown Detroit, he said we're basically just Mickey Mouse in the car around this circuit. And he said he's just so happy to get out of Detroit. He absolutely hates this place, and he's just looking forward to Gateway, because that's a track he usually run well at. And for what it was worth, given all the issues we've seen on the road and street courses, with the hybrid issue, it was very refreshing to actually see some passing today and some on-track action. I of all of the races we've seen with this new hybrid engine. I have to say, in my opinion, today was probably the most compelling of them all, and it was really, as I said, really nice to see some actual overtaking, and instead of the cars just all getting stuck and not being able to do anything.
And you bring up a good point. Quite a good, more than halfway through the race, I felt like there was no clear favorite to win this race. You had different pit strategies. We saw some passing. It was really, I felt like a toss-up. There was even a point where I was thinking, could we see Rasmussen and Scott Dixon make their strategy work and go for the win? That would be huge. But of course, just one of those deals with racing. I just feel like that overall, surprising to say, Detroit has been one of the better races this year. But I got to say, it delivered quite a show because we did not know who was going to win until the end. One of those drivers that was out of it before the end of the race, unfortunately, was Alex Palou. The big streak has come to an end. On the restart, from behind, contact, David Malukas got into the back of him and that just shoved Alex Palou into the tire wall, ending his race and, of course, his streak of podium finishes, mainly wins and a second place. Malukas was given an avoidable contact penalty, so his good day was essentially ruined. Still, a 90-point lead, so no risk of losing the points at all for Alex Palou. However, we got to be saying this, though. Alex Palou, they talked about the Indy 500 hangover. He was in the top 6 all day. He talked about after the crash how the team had really rebounded from not showing pace to potentially putting their hopes for a podium finish. So does this bring a new sense of hope to everyone, Kobe, that especially since our next race is going to be an oval, where now we could say he has won an oval, but this is Gateway, a different type of oval. Is there hope that others could bring the fight to Alex Palou?
Well, the championship is certainly a little bit closer, but, obviously not by much. You could still miss Gateway and still leave as the championship points leader, to show you how dominant of a season he's had so far. But yeah, he don't have the oval monkey on his back anymore. People asking, when are you going to win on an oval? I guess the next question is going to be like, yeah, you've won the biggest race in the world on the speedway, but now when are you going to win a short oval race? And honestly, it would not surprise me if Alex Palou was able to do that as well. And you mentioned the Indy 500 hangover, Joe. It seems like whoever wins the Indy 500 that next week in Detroit, there's always, rough. Alex Palou, and just Chip Ganassi racing in general, it seemed like they weren't really in the ball game this week. Yeah, Palou, was really fast. And if it wasn't for the incident, had a chance to potentially finish on the podium there today. But it really seems like, all the media appearances, they had to do. And it just seems like an extremely exhausting schedule where he's going from this show to that show, from this ball game to this other sporting event. It's just, a lot on whoever the Indy 500 winner is. And I think we saw that taking a toll on Palou this week, because when I saw the first photos from him on the track, look really exhausted on Friday. And then, in the Saturday, didn't really look like the Alex Palou that we've seen. So I think that the Indy 500 hangover is, really will. A lot of celebrating and an extremely busy schedule probably distracted him a lot from his typical weekly routine. But, with a little time to rest, and get back, I think Palou's going to be locked in at Gateway. And yeah, I do think it provides a new sense of hope to everyone. But given how Palou has run throughout the season, I look for Palou to continue to keep stacking consistent finishes and maintaining or extending his points lead.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that if any of the competitors have hope going forward, it's probably just them lying to themselves. Let's be completely honest here. Alex Palou finally breaks out and wins at an oval, and he does it in, typical Alex Palou extravagant fashion by winning the Indy 500. Granted, Gateway is about half the size. It's a short oval in comparison to Indianapolis, which is a bona fide super speedway. But at the same time, Alex Palou has just shown nothing but exorbitant pace this year. The man has been flying at the seat of his pants every single week. And that didn't stop this week, even with all of the potential new distractions that comes with winning the Indy 500, like going to the, Empire State Building, going through New York City, and headed to every late night show to, basically talk yourself up. With all that said, it's unfortunate that his race had to end early while he was still in contention because of the mistake of one of his competitors. But that's just sometimes how it goes when you're not at the front of the pack. So if I was the competition, yeah, I think you've got to take every single shot necessary to, think that you've got, any sort of a chance to win this championship. You've got to believe up until the very last race that you still have a chance. But I'm going to be honest, if we're being completely realistic here, this mistake wasn't on Palou's part. He was still going to end up probably in the top 5 today, but and I just fully expect him to come back and race with a renewed vigor coming into this coming race at Gateway, where granted he hasn't won, but it's not a stretch to say he could go out and win one there at Gateway in 2 weeks. Believe Kobe says there's breaking news. What's going on, Kobe?
Yeah, I got some breaking news from the streets of Detroit, and nothing to worry about unless your name is Pato Ward. You know how I just mentioned that Pato Ward doesn't like the downtown city streets of Detroit. I'm sorry, Pato, but they just announced, post-race in the media center in Detroit that they've signed a contract extension with the city of Detroit to keep the race in the downtown city streets. Yeah, several IndyCar media members reported this. Nathan Brown from Indy Star says the Detroit Grand Prix has a new 3-year deal with the city of Detroit through the year 2028, and they have an option to pick up 3 more years after that. So for Pato Awards, who thinks this is a Mickey Mouse track and really hates it and wants to go back to Belle Isle, I'm sorry, Pato, but you're going to have to stay racing on the downtown city streets of Detroit, at least through 2028. It looks like into the early 2030s if they decide to exercise that option. Roger Penske, this is his event, that he puts on himself. He's always been proud of coming to Detroit to race on the city streets, whether it was here at a Belle Isle, and it seems like this event is here to stay on the calendar. So some little bit of breaking news there that the IndyCar will be returning to the city of Detroit next year and beyond.
And this just makes it where the cries from some fans and folks in the industry of let's go back to Belle Isle, you're going to have to wait till 2030, and who knows, how that's all going to shape up. It'll be a much different environment, I feel, and well, it's interesting, as you mentioned, Kobe. This is sort of Roger Penske's event, but so far it's only been Honda winning this race, considering it's the Chevrolet Grand Prix of Detroit. So Roger really wants to get that win there. We all know that, but of course, Penske, well, that's another side topic. We could go down that road. Speaking about Arrow McLaren, I gotta say this too. One driver I think might be getting on the hot seat with Arrow McLaren has to be Nolan Siegel. Last year he was on the sideline. Then, of course, he stole essentially everyone's heart by failing to make the Indy 500 in a dramatic fashion of crashing while just trying to go for it. But then a surprise move, he was handed the number 6 Arrow McLaren Chevy ride from Theo Pourchaire, who was there replacing David Malukas, who, of course, had that injury. Now, the big rumor was funding was a big issue as to why that deal happened. But when you look at the results, we have not seen much improvement from Nolan Siegel. Only 1 top 10 finish this year, 1 last year at Gateway. And let's be honest, McLaren's history, especially in IndyCar, of you're not performing, somebody else goes in the seat, especially with that particular, the number 6 team. Last year was Malukas, Pourchaire, Nolan. This year, Christian Lundgaard had just come in and just been great with this seat in the number 7. Then Pato Ward, number 5, has some good races here and there. We know he can contend for a win. Huge, loyal crowd following. Nolan Siegel is cleared the 3rd place driver, and I feel there's some people out there that's a little bit biased, like this should still be Theo Pourchaire's seat, not his. But Tanner, do you believe time is running out on Nolan Siegel? And does he, if we don't see much improvement, do you think he's at risk of not finishing the season with McLaren?
Yes and no. I'll tackle both sides of this. So the reason I would lean towards no is, who do you replace him with at this point in the middle of the season? Theo Pourchaire is not taking that car. So that's one name that's out of the hat. Then I guess you would look at some of the other Chevy drivers. Obviously, David Malukas is not getting in that car. I don't think McLaren's interested in, Santino Ferrucci. I just don't really see a whole lot of options that are either directly off of the IndyCar grid or directly on it that they could really, go in and poach. One name that I guess stands out now that I'm, kind of talking through this is Linus Lundqvist, who was doing a fantastic job last year for Chip Ganassi and somehow came into 2025 without a ride. I think that it's possible maybe if we don't see Nolan improve over the season that he could find his way into a ride with McLaren, but I lean towards no because there are a couple of factors that play outside of the sponsorship. Nolan is very young. Like, he doesn't have a terrible amount of experience in IndyCar. This is really midway through his second season, and even his first season was abbreviated in some ways because he missed out on some events. But yeah, I just don't really foresee them moving on. Not because it's like a bad look or anything like that. It's just more to do with the fact that I don't think that there's like a bevy of names out there that you could grab that could do a better job than him based on the amount of time he spent with that team. We're closing in on the year mark of him taking that ride after his 24 Hours of Le Mans win last season. So yeah, I just feel like Siegel is definitely not really performing up to par with his teammates, but I really don't think that should be the expectation set for him because he really just is not of the caliber of them just yet, and he's just so much significantly younger. So I think McLaren would be better off just standing pat with the lineup that they have and trying to improve throughout the rest of the season, but we know how temperamental Zach Brown can be, so it's really anyone's guess what he's going to decide to do over the next month or so.
Yeah, and this just goes back to what I was saying during our IndyCar preseason show. I said out of all the drivers who could be on the hot seat, I said it would probably be Nolan Siegel unless he improved, because I always say that the McLaren IndyCar program over here is almost like the Red Bull F1 program in terms, of musical chairs with drivers and trying to figure out driver lineups. And Pato O'Ward, Christian Lundgaard, obviously given how they perform, I think they're obviously safe. And then Nolan Siegel, I figured it was fair to give him time in full season to see what he could do. But so far, he just hasn't been close to his teammates at all. As you mentioned, Joe, Nolan is clearly the third driver there at McLaren. And for the longest time, Pato O'Ward's been the number one driver there. But Christian Lundgaard has definitely been pushing him. So I guess you could say that they might have a McLaren F1-like problem where you have Piastri and Norris, trying to be the number one driver, and then you have O'Ward and Lundgaard over here trying to be the number one driver at Aaron McLaren in the NTT IndyCar Series. But I think that Nolan Siegel, he needs the next handful of races to go well for him. He needs to show growth on the racetrack, and if he doesn't, who knows what could happen with that number 6 seat. But I have to agree with Tanner at this point. Who could they possibly, put in the number 6 Chevrolet for the rest of the season? There's really no good options out there. But you did mention Linus Lundqvist. I think he would be a good choice, just to give him a trial run, see what he can do. I think it's a shame that Linus is out of the series because he's an extremely talented driver, and I believe in the right situation, in a stable environment, Linus would eventually become, one of the better IndyCar drivers in the series. I don't know if he'd be one of the best, but I think the best thing they can do this season probably stand pat. But given how impatient Zach Brown is, I would not be surprised later in the season we get an alert that the team has released Nolan Siegel from his contract and we're bringing in another driver. And I want to throw out another name out there. They had an off-season test, I believe, at the Thermal Club around Thanksgiving. It was a test that Logan Sargent was at. They say, but one of the drivers who participated in that test, that didn't get a lot of attention, another driver with F2 experience, like they brought Teo Porcher in from F2, Enzo Fittipaldi. Enzo Fittipaldi is not, he doesn't have an open wheel racing program for this year, since it looked like his road to F1 dream is over. His brother Pietro Fittipaldi's driven an IndyCar before. If they wanted to bring in another talent, from F2 who tested with the team, and why not give someone like an Enzo Fittipaldi a chance? But, at the same time, when you look at Nolan Siegel last year, they brought him in, because they really needed some funding. I guess if they, still need the funding at this point, they might be willing to overlook that, ignore some of the performances. But, at some point, even when you do bring in funding, teams will eventually move on from you. And we'll see if Nolan Siegel will be given the rest of the season to figure it out. But I definitely think his seat is certainly getting warmer, and I believe we had a comment from Denver that's really interesting, especially the last part. First, you say a modern version of the 1988 Detroit street circuit layout would be awesome to see. next year, and he said Will Power might jump to McLaren if Penske doesn't renew his contract. I think Will Power to McLaren would be an interesting choice, especially this late in his career. And if they aren't able to, come to an agreement, him and Team Penske, move to McLaren, obviously extend his open wheel racing career. But if he were to go to McLaren in a situation like that, I wonder what McLaren would want to do. Would they want to try to get, another young driver like a Pato Award and a Christian Lundgaard so they can have 3 young bullets who they can build on, for the foreseeable future? Because if they sign Will Power, he would just honestly at this point in his career probably just be, obviously short term, like a stopgap driver until they can get, another big young star in that car. I think that would probably be, one of the only reasons if Will Power were to make a jump to McLaren at that point. But still, it would be really smart of them to have one veteran and 2 younger drivers in the lineup if they decided to go that route. What do you think, Joe and Tanner?
I think that could be a big move if we hear shortly that, hey, Malukas is going and your Will Power, start talking to them. Because, Will Power, the experience he brings, I'll be honest, though, I think he's going to be like Alexander Rossi. If he does not get a win, if he does not perform, he's going to be gone in 2 years. Because some people will say he's getting up there in age. What about you, Tanner?
I mean, Will Power showed today that he is just as good as he's always been. So I think that having a driver like that occupy the third entry, let's not say third car, because I feel like if Will Power gets behind the wheel of that car, it's going at least 10 spots up the grid more than it's been running. So, I think that having a KG veteran such as him, the best hot lapper in the history of the entire series, I think that would be an absolute win for Arrow McLaren. So, I think if the plan is to move on from Nolan Siegel after this season, I definitely think that if they can get into Will Power's new agencies group, good graces, I think that they could come away with a really big steal out of the Team Penske camp. So that was a very interesting comment there, Denver. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I encourage everyone, be sure to comment in the chat room. Love sharing those questions and opinions with us on the air, and plenty to discuss. Now, of course, speaking about Penske, of course, Will Power out there trying to get that podium finish. You look a little further back, Joseph Newgarden from 24th to 9th place, right behind him, a driver I mentioned, Alexander Rossi, who was with McLaren, now Ed Carpenter Racing, 10th place from 15th starting on the grid. I mean, Rossi, as I mentioned, he was with McLaren, wasn't delivering the results, lost the seat to Lundgaard. Now we're approaching Gateway, and I feel like for Joseph Newgarden, this has to be, besides the Indy 500, the next biggest race he's been looking forward to. He's so good in the ovals. He's probably going to be a contender, and of course, he has a new race engineer and everything. So, Kobe, considering the changes that all the Penske drivers had to face, for Newgarden, is this a sign of potential considering how he went from the 24th to the top 10 and Gateway next weekend?
Yeah. I think when we come to Gateway the next race week, I think it's going to be, a welcome change for Team Penske, especially Joseph Newgarden, because it obviously hasn't been the season that we expected from them. It's really crazy that we're this many races into the season and we haven't seen a Team Penske driver win, or in fact, we haven't seen a Chevrolet powered IndyCar driver win this year. It's been nothing but Honda power this season that have been dominating the series. And I think that there'll be a welcome change for him because Team Penske always runs well at Gateway. And I think, if history serves us well and they aren't, too badly affected by the changes in their IndyCar leadership team, I think that they should be one of the contenders to go out there and win the race. And right now, looking at the updated points, Jordan Will Power is 5th in the points, got 8 for Scott McLaughlin. And then Joseph Newgarden is down in 13th, which is uncharted territory for this guy. And it's been real interesting. Last season, was kind of a down year for Joseph Newgarden. This year, looking like another down year as well. And it's going to be interesting to see if Newgarden can turn it around because it seems like he's been, in a slump lately. And Tanner, I know it was yesterday, we just published your article on the Grid Network website and about Kyle Larson's second double attempt and all of that. And down in the article, you talked about how when we added this hybrid system, how it changed the driving style on the cars. And you mentioned you have veterans like a Scott Dixon, some Newgard, and, seem to have trouble coming to grips with, how the car handles now compared to before. And maybe, and like you were suggesting in your article, and I encourage you to check that out on gridnetworktv.com. Really excellent piece there that with Newgard, and, maybe he's just one of those drivers who's having a really hard time adapting, to this new hybrid system and how it changes the handling of his car.
Yeah, I definitely think that absolutely lends to some of Newgarden's struggles, but we've got to remember last year when we came to Gateway, we had that new hybrid installed already, and he went out and won the race. Granted, there was a bit of dubious circumstances that kind of came with that victory, but at the same time, he absolutely, ran up front for most of the race and took the win when it was given to him. So you got to tip your cap to that number 2 team on the ovals, even with the hybrid unit being implemented last year in I would say a pretty hasty manner by IndyCar leadership. It seems that it never really slowed Newgarden down at any of the ovals. Obviously, he had his struggles at Milwaukee later in the year, and didn't really seem to be terribly competitive at the finale in Nashville, but I still think that when it comes to the ovals, Joseph Newgarden is the most feared competitor of anyone out there. He just seems to have a better understanding of them than everyone else. And even though he's, got this new strategist with him, I don't think that that'll matter too much considering most of the other moving parts at Penske are still in their place. So I think that Newgarden should be one to watch this coming week at Gateway. I also feel like the rest of Team Penske and the Foyt cars will be in contention, specifically David Malukas. This is the track that kind of put him on the map not too long ago. And considering his great run at Indianapolis and another solid run this week that unfortunately he kind of stepped in his own way of getting a good finish out of, I still think that the Chevys will be a force at the short ovals this year, just like they were last year. So today should be a bright spot for Newgarden in a season that's otherwise been pretty down. So they should definitely take this as a, positive step forward. But I feel like today was more of a result of the race going the way that it did, especially in the early going, where it seemed like we couldn't get out of the yellow flag. So him being on the hard strategy to start the race allowed him to kind of get better track position and better fuel efficiency than he otherwise would have had. So I feel like today was a lot of good fortune for the 2 team, and they still should be considered a threat next week, regardless of today's result.
Next race weekend for IndyCar Gateway. It's going to be very exciting. Encourage everyone to subscribe to us right here on YouTube. Don't miss any of our coverage. And, of course, Grid Network TV across social media. Kobe, with that said, let's switch over to it was a very interesting Spanish Grand Prix, to say the least.
Yeah, it wasn't as interesting at the front of the field, but it was interesting for, a multi-time Formula One world champion. But starting at the front, it was Oscar Piastri had no real challenge for the lead in Barcelona as he cruised to victory in the Spanish Grand Prix. However, Max Verstappen went from a potential podium finish to a 10th place finish, only 1 point earned and a lot of criticism. Verstappen started the last portion of the race on the only set of hard tires left. He lost third to Leclerc on the restart after the safety car. Then the controversy with George Russell, who was on the inside, but appeared not to be ahead of Verstappen. Then Verstappen went off the track and maintained his position until Red Bull instructed him to relinquish it. It appears that Verstappen then deliberately collided with Russell to reclaim the position out of frustration. But Russell eventually got around Max, and Verstappen was handed a 10-second time penalty almost immediately. Tanner, was this another case of Max Verstappen cracking under pressure when he has to actually race people instead of being so far up front? And do you think a 10-second time penalty was enough?
I feel like if I answer this question truthfully, I may be arrested, but
you and Ben both.
Yeah. But I try to give you all as truthful as answers as possible, so I'm going to let it rip here. Max Verstappen should be suspended for our next race in Canada. I think that today's particular, incidents that he got himself into absolutely warranted 4 penalty points and what should have resulted in a 1 race ban. But I think that F1 knows that Max Verstappen is part of what, sells tickets and puts butts in seats. So having him not be at one of the premier races on the F1 calendar would be an absolute loss for them. At the same time, though, what else is a loss? Not having, proper racing standards applied to drivers. And that's kind of been the story of the last 5 years for Max Verstappen. He constantly pulls these little antics like this every week that he doesn't run well and up front. And I'm frankly getting rather sick of it. It's just like, I don't think that he should have had to give the position back to George. Let me just say that first and foremost. On the one hand, I do think if Max even remotely tried to tap the brake and continue to make that second corner, he probably could have without driving off the track. But as we've seen with Max Verstappen, anytime he even faces even a remote amount of contact, he thinks that gives him the right to just drive off the circuit and keep his position. So, I don't think that he should have had to give the position back to George because he didn't initiate the contact and George was not ahead at the apex of the corner, whether I think that rule is asinine or not. And then I've seen NASCAR drivers have more grace in, executing payback than what we saw out of Max Verstappen today. I just nothing about that was incidental, accidental, nothing like that. It was purely intentional. You don't just throttle up in the braking zone and clean out a guy that is not even near the apex. George was trying to give him room to continue on the bottom of the corner, and Max took all of it and more. And while the 10-second penalty is something you definitely have to adjudicate during the race, I agreed with that portion of it. I just felt like the nature of the incident was, completely avoidable. So I just feel like this is kind of like Max Verstappen at his worst, which is, him at any point where he's not in first place. So, yeah, I think that a 1 race ban could have been on the table, and I think the FIA decided to coward out and not do anything about it and give him 3 to put him right on the edge. So for the next 2 weeks, Max Verstappen has to mind his P's and Q's, and he's terrible at that. So we'll see if he can keep everything bolted together, but I have a high suspicion that that is not what's going to happen.
I feel Max, the pressure got to him and he caved under it. I mean, he was looking like potentially getting the opportunity for the podium. Then we have the safety car period. And then he goes out on hard tires. He knew he was going to have a hard time trying to hold off everybody else on mediums or soft tires. But that's all Red Bull had. And they just raced their heart out to try to get the best finish they could, but it was just not working out. And then, like you said, Tanner, it's just like he never lost the lead entering the corner. I don't see why he had to give the position back. But unless, the Red Bull team just assumed like maybe that was not the case, be on the safe side, give the position to George Russell. If Max Verstappen was on soft tires, I think he would have not had an issue because he knows he could probably still race George Russell, claim that position again. But he just knew he was a sitting duck. And that move was just something where I feel, like you said, that should be a 1 race ban. There was no way he could get out of it. In the post-race media discussion, he refused to answer that question. George Russell made it clear that he saw it as just intentional, that this is just the way he races. That's how he is. And the standards that he has set, I think, considering he is a multi-time Formula One World Driver Champion, people are going to look up at him and say, this is how he raced, so I'm going to race this way. We cannot lose the standard of what's good racing in Formula One, because I think it's already bad enough where so often whoever gets the lead entering the corner is just going to push the other driver wide off the course, or they hit the brakes and they get a bigger gap from them. This is just getting to the point where, in this case, with Verstappen, he's been known for doing this. This is coming down to him, and he's not happy with it. I think there's also all the stress and factors of what is going on with this Red Bull team. You have Yuki Tsunoda just putting around. It looks like an absolute joke right now, this Red Bull squad that got the constructors years ago, and now you can't get a good driver to handle this car. It's reminded me of Honda and MotoGP. Nobody can make that bike work after Marc Marquez left. Nobody can make this car work except Max Verstappen. And now he's getting to the point where he's running out of what he can do with this car. So overall, I think the pressure got to him. The 3 points, that might be the saving grace and saying, okay, that's a big deal, because I feel if there is one thing, that could be a big factor, a potential race ban. But I feel like if he didn't have such a high number of penalty points, I would feel like this was not enough of a penalty.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely Max Verstappen at his worst today. And it's really crazy. It seems like this is the same old song and dance we see with him all the time whenever he has to try to go out and race someone for position. It's like you give him the best car, he goes out there and he's the man. But once he actually has to battle someone for position when he doesn't have the superior car, that's when we all run into problems. As Adam says, that Max knows he's not winning the world championship this year, so he's frustrated. Yeah, it's obviously frustrating, when you won the last few world championships and now you're in a car that, second Vettel to the McLarens, and Denver says Max knows he's losing. He knows he's fighting a losing battle in this year's championship and dealing with both McLaren drivers, especially Oscar. Yeah, I understand why it would be a frustrating time for Max Verstappen. You're on top of the world and then you're not. So it definitely has to be, or it should be, a humbling experience to him. And Joe, you mentioned Max not really wanting to talk much about it after the race, but he did make one comment. ESPN posted the comment that Max made when they asked him about George Russell's comments and how George is worried about the kids watching him, like you were alluding to, that you have young kids out here who love Formula One, who look up to multi-time world champions like Max Verstappen, as like a role model. And if they see their so-called hero, making moves like this on tracks when they're in the go-karts or in Formula 3, Formula 2, they see their hero doing this, they're like, hey, I can do this too to pass for position or whatever, and then it just sets a bad precedent. Then this stuff will trickle down, to all of the feeder series and all of that, and that's something, not a precedent that we want to set moving forward. And when Max was asked what he think about George, worried about what the young kids coming up the ladder systems, think when they watch this, Max said, "I'll bring you some tissues next time, George." So really snarky comment there from Verstappen. And George Russell also said, when in response to the incident getting hit by Verstappen, he said that that's just how Max goes racing, and forgot it was a real F1 race and not iRacing. And some have compared it to when Michael Schumacher turned or the lack of turning into Jacques Villeneuve in 1997. Schumacher was stripped of all his points and disqualified, and Verstappen is now up to 11 penalty points after receiving 3 more penalty points for the incident today. So he's 1 penalty point away from a 1 race ban. I know, Tanner, you've already alluded to how you feel about this. So I'm going to ask you first, Joe. Verstappen will obviously need to be on his best driving behavior for the entire month of June until, some of his penalty points expire. And so here's my question for you. Do you think it is a realistic possibility that he gets a 1 race ban? And I have a feeling if he gets a 1 race ban, I'm just going to call it now, Red Bull not going to be scoring any points for that race, because Yuki Tsunoda is driving a car that's slower than Chugga-Boom from the perils of Penelope pit stop. It's just insane how crazy that second car is at Red Bull. And then if you try to put someone else in the car, who are you going to put in the car to replace Verstappen? Hadjar? Are you going to call up a Yumo Waza from Japan? It seems like just an insanely ridiculous situation that could unfold.
I'm going to say this. We are going to Canada, Montreal. And we all know that first corner, how is that right hand and that left hand and that loop. How many times have we seen first lap mayhem there? This is where I feel like Max Verstappen is at a disadvantage. If I'm a Oscar Piastri, a Charles Leclerc in a Ferrari, that you might have Max Verstappen behind you, depending on how qualifying goes, and he has a better start, you could much easier put Verstappen in that bad spot in which either A, he's going to have to let off, or B, make a decision. And if he makes contact, it's very easy for everyone to point the finger and it's like, oh, Max Verstappen, he's in the wrong. He needs penalty points. He is not in a good spot entering Montreal, and I don't know which races off the top of my head after Montreal. Is it Austria by chance, the Red Bull Ring, or is it a different track? But if that's where I think it could happen, because this racetrack at Montreal with that first opening complex corners, you could easily see Max Verstappen put in a bad spot, and that's what I would do if I was a Charles Leclerc. I know he could face a race ban. He's going to have to race a little carefully around me. Advantage to them, disadvantage to Max Verstappen, which not often we say that, but I do think it's a very realistic possibility.
Yeah, Max Verstappen's absolutely on the back foot here, and every driver in the field needs to make it their priority to make him make those choices every single lap, every single turn. Because if you can just get him out of the field, you can finally show us all what real racing at Formula One level is all about. So we can finally remove the problem and take it somewhere else. I would like to add one thing from our previous question that Joe mentioned about how Verstappen kind of answered that question after the race about how, was it deliberate? And he was just like, does it matter? And then he added, I only want to answer questions about the race. And to that, I would say, I wish that journalist had a little bit more gumption to just be like, well, that happened in the race, Max, so I'm asking you about the race. So just to, juice him up a little bit. But outside of that, I think that Max Verstappen is going to have to make a choice over these next two races that he's probably not going to want to make. And I just don't have the faith in his, ability to rein himself in enough that he's going to make the right decisions. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. I'm a little bit worried that he's going to do something stupid and get himself sat out for more than one race, knowing that he'll already be out for one because of the first dumb thing he does. He has displayed enough erratic and frankly just flat out reckless behavior on the racing circuit before that when he's put into a high pressure situation, he makes really dangerous decisions. And I'm frankly a little concerned that he could take that to a very bad degree if things get real bad for him at one of these next two races. So, I think that he's in extreme danger of missing a race, maybe more if he does something profoundly stupid. And I think it's well within his character to do something profoundly stupid here soon. So if you're a Red Bull fan, you got to hope that he keeps all of his screws tightened and keeps everything together. But if we're looking at the Max Verstappen of 2025 that we've seen thus far that already has 11 penalty points, I'm inclined to believe that he's going to do something really stupid and get himself sat out for a week. He could spend time with his baby.
So more family time, that would certainly be a positive from this, and as we saw, with the new F1 movie, most of the F1 drivers got to, see that in a private viewing, but Max Verstappen did not because he wanted to spend more time with his family, as he said. So I guess that is understandable. And see, Denver said you can see George Russell, rallying Max up to the point where he just snaps in Canada. And like, if I were the other drivers on the grid, knowing he's at one penalty point away from race ban, what did Earnhardt say? Rattle this cage. I think they need to rattle Max Verstappen's cage. And Max has shown that, when he doesn't have the best car, he can be easily rattled. So I would not be surprised if, any of the drivers try to bait him, into try to making a mental error there and get him sat out for a race. And as I mentioned, like, if Max gets sat out of a race, who in the world will come up to drive alongside Yuki Tsunoda? Will we see someone whoever would replace Verstappen? Would they be right back there with Tsunoda outside the points, struggling, trying to make something happen? And Max even said himself, when asked about Yuki's struggle, he said that, Yuki's not a pancake. And actually, like in Dutch, when you say someone's not a pancake, it means, that they're basically not an, incompetent driver or something like that. So it's certainly not Yuki. If Yuki was still in the RB car, he would probably, be running much better than how he's been running in that Red Bull. So it's just a mystery as to why, that second Red Bull car can't seem to do anything. It seems like, that this is just a car that only Max Verstappen can drive. Max Verstappen is probably the only driver in this world who can drive that Red Bull car. And if you put Yuki Tsunoda and a one race replacement driver in the car, probably going to see, both of those drivers struggle. It don't matter who you put in that car, unless it's Max Verstappen, you're probably going to be in a lot of trouble. So for Max's sake and the team's sake, they're going to hope he doesn't get into trouble during the month of June, avoids that one race ban. But given, what we've seen from him, it would not be a surprise later on if he gets banned for a race. And now moving on to close out our F1 program, we'll talk about, like Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, they were the rest of the podium finishers after Piastri, and George Russell in fourth after getting around Verstappen. Well, one of the bright moments in the race, Nico Hülkenberg bringing the Kick Sauber to fifth place, finishing ahead of Lewis Hamilton. This race, didn't see a bunch of action, but the safety car towards the end, bunch to fill up. Tire strategy and DRS helped, them overtake on the main straight. But next year's 2026 Spanish Grand Prix will take place on a brand new street circuit in Madrid, Spain. That was already confirmed. While the feature of this Barcelona circuit we saw today, the feature of that track is up in the air. So, Tanner, would Barcelona being gone from the 2026 schedule and beyond be a disappointment for all the fans, or would it be a track that not many would miss?
I'll speak personally first. I really like Catalunya, and I like that they made the adjustment to the circuit to allow for that final section to be a bit more free-flowing instead of, super tight and, having that chicane towards the end of the track. I think that the current layout is actually really good and allows for a lot better racing for Formula One. But fan sentiment about this track has been mixed at best, it seems like. Over the years, it seems that most fans don't really care for it. But at the same time, it's like we already do so many races on street circuits that losing, a permanent facility like this to a street circuit is kind of lame, in my opinion. Obviously, we don't know what this new Madrid ring is going to race like. I would like to hope that it'll race well, but we'll just have to see. I think that within 2 years' time, though, we'll probably see people start to be like, oh, we miss Catalunya. So so hopefully we'll end up back in Barcelona before the end of the decade, but I wouldn't be too optimistic about that. It's a shame. I think the track in its current layout is the best it's been and is offering some really good racing. I saw a lot of great overtakes today that were produced because of this track's current layout, and it'd be a shame if it's gone dormant forever from Formula One.
If anything, I could see this track being one of those that'll be rotating year after year, but they'll have to adjust the schedule where it's not so close to the Madrid race date. Overall, I feel the drivers, if you're going from Formula 2, Formula 3, other feeder series, so many series race at Barcelona, Catalunya, they all test there. Everyone has so much experience there compared to what's going to be this new track where you're not going to have that. So I can see that being a little bit of that new track factor where, okay, this is a new track nobody's been to compared to this circuit where everyone's been to, where it's Formula 2, Formula 3, other feeder series, sports car racing. It seems like everybody races there, even MotoGP. I think this will be a track where it will be missed, but I don't think it's going to have such a big outcry compared to if this was a track like Spa when that's gone every other year. Or I know Baku has not secured its future yet, but we're still waiting for that. And that's become a very popular track, one of the newer street tracks. Overall, I think this track has done some good racing. I mean, Formula One, the track product, the expectations much higher compared to, say, in the 90s, where you were going to be happy if you had more than 3 lead changes. Now it seems like everyone's anticipating multiple lead changes, some restarts here and there, safety car periods. And I think this track with the current layout has met that demand. Just still, I think overall it's going to be one of those deals where this track, as much as drivers may like it because they have so much experience racing it, when it comes to the fan base, and I think that's the big difference, the fan base, they're not exactly going to miss this track that much.
Yeah. I got a comment there from Denver saying the Madrid street course might prove to be a positive change. The Spanish Grand Prix, you say you give it 2 years to see how it runs and give my verdict positive or negative. Yeah, I think that's a completely fair assessment there. See how the Madrid street circuit goes. It may go well, it may not. We'll just have to wait and see there. And I know a lot of people are been frustrated over the years, with a lot of our classic traditional F1 tracks going away, and we're being replacing with all these street circuits that come into play. Like here in the US, we got 2 street circuits, got Miami Grand Prix and then Las Vegas Grand Prix. We've seen Azerbaijan come into play as well. Got Singapore on the schedule. Just been an increasing number of street races. And if it wasn't for the pandemic, we would have had the streets of Vietnam. And that was actually a fun track to drive in the F1 game. But unfortunately, that's one of those lost tracks that we'll never be able to race at. And F1 is talking about adding a street race, I believe, in Thailand in the future as well. So it seemed like we've just been on a run of street races, and then we're going to leave some of these classic tracks behind. I think from that perspective, it'd be sad to see some of those tracks go away. But I wonder, is there a case where both tracks can exist? Could we have a Spanish Grand Prix in Madrid, and then Barcelona could it return as the Catalunya Grand Prix or something like that? Try to have 2 races in Spain. We'll just have to wait and see how that goes, and we'll put a bow on F1 and get on to the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship race in the streets of Detroit.
Yeah, IMSA competition over at Detroit. The WeatherTech Sports Car Championship joined IndyCar in the streets of Detroit, and the 100-minute sprint race put on a thrilling show. Honestly, the action GTP and GTD Pro felt like watching a Saturday night short track race, Kobe, because after so much being and banging, we saw the Porsche Penske Motorsports 4-race winning streak come to an end with the number 93 Meyer-Shank Racing, Nick Yellowly, Ranger van der Zande. They took the win over the number 10 Wayne Taylor Racing Cadillac. A big effort for van der Zande, making a late race pass on Ricky Taylor. And overall, this was just great race, and how he carefully navigated GTD Pro traffic to give Meyer-Shank that first IMSA win since the 2023 Rolex 24 Hours at Daytona. How much does this do for Acura and Cadillac needing those strong results after a dominant start to the season from Porsche?
Yeah, the Porsche Penske Motorsport domination train is officially over, and Acura has broken that. And it looked like for a minute, Porsche's domination was going to continue, but they were on, they were up front towards the end, and both cars that slipped back. Felipe Nasser, he was really getting shuffled around and knocked out of the way towards there at the end. It just wasn't Porsche's day, and I figured that Porsche would have a issue, especially when IMSA had the big BOP break in Detroit. I thought that would peg them back a little bit, and Porsche could have still pulled off the victory, but seemed like the Acura and the Cadillac just better there during the last stint. I think for Acura, this is a huge shot in arm for them, especially for Meyer-Shank Racing, who hasn't won in just over 2 years now, and to finally get that monkey off their back, good for them. Ringer van der Zande, Nick Yellowly, for them to have to stand on the top step of the podium. I think that's great for them, but I think it's even more important for Cadillac, believe it or not, although they didn't win the race. The number 10 Felipe Albuquerque, Ricky Taylor, Wayne Taylor Racing, Cadillac in general, they really, really needed this result, because it's been a struggle across the board, not just for Wayne Taylor Racing and Action Express Racing. It's been a struggle for Cadillac in general. They've really had a hard time lately in IMSA competition. For them, to run as strongly as they did in the streets of Detroit, right in front of the GM headquarters, that was, really important for them to do that, especially entering the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Wayne Taylor, they're going to be going to Le Mans with Action Express to join in their teammates over there in the FIA World Endurance Championship, Jota Sport. So I think that this was some much needed momentum for Cadillac in general, and we'll see how this season looks moving forward for Acura and Cadillac, at Porsche. And we'll see if BMW can potentially get in the fight, and Aston Martin, continuing to plug away with that, Valkyrie hypercar sounded really good roaring down the streets at Detroit. Hopefully they'll get into the fight, as they continue to develop their car. And before we move on, Joe, we actually have some interesting little IndyCar drama happening on Twitter between Scott McLaughlin and team principal Aaron McLaren, Tony Kanaan. They're taking shots at each other, so I thought that would be important to mention in regards, to the incident, which Nolan Siegel spun around. Scott McLaughlin said he misjudged that when he said old mate broke quite a bit earlier than I anticipated. He said good to see that McLaren team principals are still on the hunt for beef. He said his sponsor Good Ranchers has loads for you, and he says use the code #breaklater for 0% off. And then Tony Kanaan, the team principal, Aaron McLaren, takes another shot at Scott McLaughlin. He said, you misjudged last week, you misjudged this week. At least you get a weekend off to square that one away. I came looking for your team principal to have a chat, but I couldn't find him. He said, oh, wait. So we got some beef in the IndyCar paddock between Scott McLaughlin and McLaren team principal Tony Kanaan.
And of course, this is from that contact between Scott McLaughlin, Nolan Siegel. That is just interesting. I mean, for Scott McLaughlin to say that, and especially the little discount code, and then Tony Kanaan, man, misjudged last week. Oh, that's painful to say. I mean, we know that was a brutal experience he went through. I mean, really only Roberto Guerrero can say he's been something similar with Scott McLaughlin. Detroit, that track is going to probably gain a reputation as this is a physical, hard-nosed, beating and banging street course, because we saw that in IMSA. GTD Pro, oh my goodness. The Ford Mustang GT3s looked unstoppable all weekend and coming to Detroit. Ford Chevrolets both want to do well. GM headquarters right there in the background, while Ford headquarters are in nearby Dearborn. But ultimately, the number 64 Multimatic Motorsports Ford of Mike Rockefeller instead won the class overall. The number 3 Pratt Miller Motorsports Corvette right behind, but we did see some fireworks throughout the GTD Pro field. Lots of contact, including Jack Hosberg, Vasher Sullivan Lexus spinning around the number 77 AO Racing, the Roxy Porsche, Klaus Bachler early in the race again spun around, and then on the final lap, the number 4 Corvette and Nick Catsbury spun out the Roxy Porsche in the second spin of the race, this time with Lauren Heinrich driving. So Heinrich went spinning. He spun it back into Catsburg and spun the Corvette as well. Both drivers were penalized post-race and dropped to 5th and 6th in class respectively. Kobe, were you surprised by how intense the multi-class racing on the streets of Detroit turned out to be?
Well, as I alluded to during our IndyCar section, I said for some of the series, this street track is perfect. It felt like, almost bumper cars out there, like the Saturday night short track race, as you mentioned, especially with multi-class racing, seeing the GTP cars try to weave in and out of the GT cars and in the GT cars, just trading a lot of paint there. It was just really crazy to see. It was just extremely intense there at the end. And I thought that was, a solid recovery drive from the Roxy Porsche, especially getting spun by the Lexus and then coming back. It was crazy. Catsburg spun out Heinrich there. Then I guess Heinrich, like, if I'm going around on this, last lap, I'm going to take you with me. And then, like, he just kept it in the gas and ended up taking Catsburg out with him there. So, as Calvin Fish, would say, a lot of argy-bargy there on the final lap. But I'm honestly, given how tight the street circuit was, I'm not really surprised by the intensity of this race. I thought it was really good action. I thought it was one of the more entertaining races that we've seen so far this race weekend. It was, I thought that Detroit put on a really good street race for the IMSA series. When you have multi-cars classing, it just adds to the on-track product. I remember there at the end, seeing the GTP cars, going down that long backstretch, just using the hybrid power to completely blow by those GT cars and figuring out where to place your cars, just really challenging there, and for the prototype drivers and then for the GT drivers as well, trying to, be alert of what's going on around you. And it can easily go wrong there on a street circuit. So considering, all of the weaving and bobbing we saw, I thought the drivers ran a pretty good race for the most part.
Overall, good racing. This track, plenty to offer. I assume with IndyCar having that extension, we're going to see plenty more of IMSA competition right here as well. Kobe, let's switch over to Formula E, which does a lot of street course racing, but this time they were at a purpose-built racetrack over in Shanghai.
Yeah, the ABB FI Formula E World Championship was in Shanghai, China for a doubleheader race weekend. In race 1, Max Gunther won that won a race that saw a thrilling battle for second place on the last side. The points leader, Oliver Rowland, finished fifth after starting sixth place, but was in the battle for second place at the end. Race 2 was delayed for over an hour due to rain and ended with a rolling start. The conditions were still tricky, and Nick Cassidy, I almost said Nikki Cassidy, think about Nikki Catsworth here, but Nick Cassidy scored his first win of the season from pole. It was also Cassidy's first win since Berlin last year, and this may end the slump that started after he spun out of the lead in Portland in 2024. Now he has a win and leaves Shanghai 7th in points, while Roland has a 68-point lead over Pascal Wehrlein. Only 5 races remain in this year's Formula E season, and 15 drivers are left in the championship battle. Jakarta, Indonesia is up next in the year with 2 doubleheaders in Berlin and London. And the drivers who were eliminated from the championship are Lucas Degrassi, Sam Bird, Mitch Evans, Norman Nato, Robin Fries, Zane Maloney, and David Beckman. Joe, out of the 7 drivers eliminated from championship contention, who's the biggest surprise?
Honestly, none of them surprised me because, I mean, when you look at Maloney, Beckman, nothing really going on. Robin French, he's a good driver, but I feel like he just never is consistent enough to be a championship contender. That Envision team, which uses a Jaguar powertrain, they just don't seem to have much this year. Jaguar in general, just not having going anything really, and that will lead to Sam Bird. I just think Sam Bird's at that point where you got to start wondering how much longer is it going to be around Formula E. When he was with the Envision Virgin team, he was a weekly contender for wins, getting close to championships. He made that switch to Jaguar. We all said, including us when we were working with the Formula E Zone folks, this is a move to get a championship. He didn't get that done. He gets sent off to McLaren. Big career opportunity. And this year, just nothing going on. In fact, his rookie teammate, Taylor Bernard, is really outperforming him. You couldn't tell it. He was a rookie and Sam Bird was a long veteran at Formula E. I just don't think he's bringing enough to the table where, I mean, we know McLaren is heading outdoor. I think Sam Bird should be looking at finding a new ride because I don't think they're going to keep him around longer. And then that leaves Mitch Evans. And my goodness, Kobe, Mitch Evans, he started the season off right. And every year it seems like, especially with Formula E, I've always said Mitch Evans and the Jaguar team, towards the end of the season, they're championship contenders up to that last race. But they always have that slow start where they're trying to catch up and they just run out of time. The one time he did have the championship lead, he stalled out to start. Edward Martor crashed him out. Race was over. Championship was gone. This year, it looked like they had it. They finally got that first race win coming from the back towards the front. And then it's just been nothing but disappointment. And they got an 80-place grid penalty. This is ridiculous. What is that team doing? And frankly, I'm just at the point where for Jaguar, they have to be looking at changes. They cannot say, we're going to keep the same team principle. I think so many years of we're close, but no cigar. Well, I think this is this year where nothing has gone right for that team. For Mitch Evans, I think he should be looking at new rides because I'll be shocked if Jaguar kept him because he's not proven he could get the job done, and this is his worst season. You look at Nick Cassidy, since Portland, he's been on that slump, just nothing going on. And again, we talked about this was a move to get a championship. Those two are far from championship contenders right now. I mean, you look at Oliver Rowland, his big points lead. It's not going to be long, especially if Mitch Evans already out, but if Nick Cassidy has another poor race, he's running out of time. He needs something miraculous like the Nick Cassidy we saw before, just win after win, podium after podium. But I think this Jaguar team has been a big disappointment, not a surprise at how they're performing this year.
Yeah, speaking of Jaguar, I think it was just a few days ago. I think it was, if I remember the outlet correctly, I believe it was the race that reported that Nick Cassidy is actually going to leave Jaguar at the end of the season. So if that's true, and I respect, and trust what the race is reporting. So I think that's probably going to be true because most of the time when they report something, it always comes to be. So that'll be a big free agent on the market, not just, Mitch Evans. I think Jaguar in general has been a huge disappointment this year. They went from, being one of the top contending teams, maybe falling mid-pack, or, just falling towards the back of the pack, been really crazy, see Mitch Evans and Sam Bird. I would not be surprised if, when McLaren exit the series, in just a few races, he's going to exit the series as well, because I think he has designed that McLaren hypercar program in the FIA World Endurance Championship, because he's already talked about how he wants to, be a part of that program. So that would be a good place for him to stay with McLaren and finish the twilight years of his driving career in sports cars. So I think that, Mitch Evans, Sam Bird, probably the biggest disappointments for me at this late stage in the Formula E World Championship season. And next we're going to move on because we're running out of time, because the grid ranking will be updated after tonight's NASCAR race at Nashville. The NASCAR pre-race show is scheduled to air shortly after this show. It's literally minutes away. And Grid Encore, they're going to recap the Cracker Barrel 400 and the whole weekend in the Music City, because they also had the Xfinity cars on track last night and the trucks on track on Friday night. And with that said, it's time for our Grid One shining moment from this racing weekend. So guys, we had quite a few races to choose from, and let us know down in the chat below what's the one moment that stood out to you the most all throughout the series that we covered here at Grid Network. And starting with you, Tanner, what's your one shining moment?
Yeah, so I'm going to hand my one shining moment to Oscar Piastri. Obviously, he claimed his 5th win of the season today in 9 starts, and it was part of a greater string of 8 consecutive races where he has landed on the podium, which is only equaled by Lewis Hamilton in his rookie year of 2007 and Ayrton Senna back when he raced for McLaren in the late 80s and early 90s. So to be in that kind of company is just absolutely absurd. It's like when Giannis Antetokounmpo in the NBA puts up a stat line that only equaled up to something Wilt Chamberlain did back in the 60s. So, I think that Oscar Piastri, we are currently witnessing his coronation as a one-time Formula One Drivers' Champion, and possibly more than that if he can continue this ride that he's been on. The kid has shown so much pace, so much, patience in his driving, and he's just lighting up the competition, including his teammate, who looked poised to be on his way to a World Drivers' Championship after week 1. So, Oscar Piastri, the light shines on you today.
Oscar Piastri, a good shining moment. My shining moment is going to come driver that had a good day, but just came a little short from that win. It has to go to Santino Ferrucci, that AJ Foyt racing team. Little bit of luck with the timing of the last caution, but at the time of when they made their last pit stop, this is part of racing. This is how it works. They got the call right. Larry Foyt, that team, they are not having the year they have wanted. Last year, they ended the year strong. We saw Santino pull on Portland. This year, just nothing. And even the Indy 500, Santino was a little bit towards the front, but not a contender for the lead throughout the race. Comes in here, older tires, great restart. We had multiple restarts that cut down from 23 to go, less and less. He gets passed by Kyle Kirkwood, doesn't make any foolish mistakes to try to stop that from happening. He then almost gets passed by Colton Herta, holds him off, and just the smart racing he did of saving his push to pass. So when Colton Herta ran out, he used it to just get away, focus on bringing home that second place finish. Big day for Santino Ferrucci and the AJ Foyt team.
And my one shining moment is actually not going to come from any of the races that we covered today. It's going to come from a very special race last night. I got to give a call to 12-year-old Keelan Harvick, for going to victory lane at Kevin Harvick's Kern Raceway there on the West Coast in California. That was just such an incredible Cars Tour West race. I watched last night. I think that Kern Raceway, is one of the most underrated short tracks in the entire country. It's a really good racy short track, and the second groove is starting to come in. Kevin Harvick himself said, I believe, give the asphalt some more time to age, and you're going to see a third groove and come up really racy little short track there. Kern's a lot of fun. It was nice to see, the Harvick showdown, as they dubbed it. See father and son compete against each other. Kevin Harvick had the dominant car early in the race, won the first segment of the race, and then the second segment came around, Harvick's car, kind of slid on back, but he was there battling for the win until he got wrecked by another late model driver. I think his name was Jacob Gomez. And when the saving grace was, as the leaders all wreck, guess who was the first one to get through the wreck? It was young Keelan Harvick in that number 62 car, which is a Harvick family number. And then to see Keelan, perfectly execute the final restart, and go out there, get the checker flag, go to victory lane with his mom, his dad, and his sister. Real special moment there for the Harvick family. And just think this kid is just 12 years old, and now he's a winner in the big cars and late models against some of the drivers who have been doing this, for a very long time. If he's this good at 12 years old, imagine what he's going to be when he's 16 and become eligible to run the short tracks in ARCA and the truck series. I think, just goes to show, that Keelan has a great teacher, and his father, Kevin, and sky's the limit for him. It's going to be fun to watch him develop over the next few years. So that's my one shining moment. Keelan Harvick at 12 years old is a winner and a late model in the Cars Tour West Series.
That was a lot of fun. That racing, the leaders crashing, just short track racing as fine as you said at that speedway. And of course, we're going to be covering more racing. I put the link in the chat room. You can click there. NASCAR pre-race show start in about 8 minutes. Tanner and I will be there. We're doing our double duty coverage here again. So we encourage everyone to tune in. Plenty to talk about before the NASCAR race tonight. Monday, Grid Encore will recap the Cup Series, Xfinity, and Truck Series, plus Indy next at Detroit. Big crash that caused a red flag. Formula 2, Formula 3 at Barcelona. Kobe will get back Wednesday. Grid tonight. Then Winter Motorsports will be previewing the upcoming race weekend for Canada at F1 Academy, and a lot of racing next race weekend. With that said, we're out of time. So for Kobe and Tanner, I'm Joe. We'll see you next time. But if you're a NASCAR fan, tune in. We'll be on in 8 minutes. Link in the chat room. See you soon.